For any of you that are on the spectrum or neurodivergent, do you think you have any success in dating? If so, share your stories. Email me. For anyone that's still navigating and feel like you're struggling, what are some issues that you have? I really want to know what's coming up for you, ladies. Also, this is going to be a trending topic for me. It's highly requested, so I think it's something that we should probably expound on. For anyone that's neurodivergent or on the spectrum, right, the top 3 things that are essential to navigating intimacy or even relationships or dating is going to be consistency, structure, and communication. These 3 things are crucial to you managing your own needs while simultaneously appropriately navigating the dating space. So with consistency, structure, and communication being in the forefront, right? Those 3 things being centered, it's for the purpose of making sure that you feel emotionally safe, making sure that you can articulate what you need from your partner. Conflict resolution, you have to make sure that's something that's possible between you and your person. Another thing I want to be able to point out are some no-nos, right? Going with the flow, that's a big no-no, okay? And I'm going to expand on that in a little bit. Also, lack of direction. Going with the flow, lack of direction, those things right there, they're kind of synonymous, but I wanted to kind of put lack of direction because even if you're going with the flow because you don't want to feel pressured, there better be a direction that's very clear cut in which you're flowing to. Okay, you want to make sure of that. Also, lack of boundaries. A big no-no is a lack of boundaries. For anyone, let's say for example, perhaps you're sheltered, right? Chances are you probably don't have as much experience, and usually people that don't have experience, you don't know what boundaries are for you. And the last thing you want is to find yourself engaging with someone intimately and you don't realize there's a boundary that needs to be there until after they violate it, right? People can only treat you the way in which you teach them or enable them. So let's say, for example, you don't even know what you want. I would hope that you're very in tune with your body, that in the event that you don't feel comfortable, that you have the words to communicate that, you know what, I don't think I'm ready. Oh, some other things that came up. I was doing some research. I wanted to see what Google and some articles were saying. If you're navigating this space as a neurodivergent, you need to make sure that you go into situations not making it all about the other person, okay? So it's being on the spectrum and having this disposition or this tendency to mold yourself, right? Let's think about masking behaviors, okay? Making yourself shift or mold into someone else. That is something you have to be very aware of. You don't want to adjust or compromise yourself in that way. Yes, you might feel like you're a chameleon, but at the same time, you want to be able to know who you are authentically and be able to show up with that. And people on the spectrum, they tend to be very preoccupied, especially when they really like someone, very preoccupied. So it can be very easy for you to slip into like this intrusive thought pattern, rumination, heavy preoccupation, borderline obsessive type of mindset or thought process about this person. Of course, you're going to end up molding yourself to them some way, shape, or form, especially if you're heavily preoccupied with them, right? Also, be wary of enabling mistreatment. So just so you guys know, people that are on the spectrum in particular, they have a history of abuse that's very common. And even if there is nothing very major like neglect where your parents, even put it like this, even in the best case scenario, people on the spectrum at some point would have been mistreated or abused simply because they're not neurotypical, not normal. Everyone at some point with this have heard someone saying, why can't you be normal, right? They struggle with understanding social cues. They have social deficits. They struggle with the nuances. Something as simple as not understanding that you shouldn't use certain tones or not being able to pick up on certain figurative, speech. These things can lead to people bullying them. Also, if they live a life, right, and let's say in the worst case scenario, let's say they're at home being abused, these people, they tend to perpetuate systems, right, because that's what they need. It's very easy for someone that's on the spectrum to simultaneously go out into the world navigating these relationships, utilizing the system about love that they already know, and just continue to choose it. This is a quintessential example of how I often tell people, you know, it's like you don't know a red flag is a red flag simply because all you know is that flags are red. That's a thing. And oftentimes, what, you know, it can be unfortunate, but people, they don't realize that what they learned about love is disinterest, right? Disinterest, and or maybe mistreatment. And technically, you know, while we can understand that our family members love us, you put those behaviors elsewhere in real life on someone else, it's giving they don't like you. And they're making it very clear, but you continue to choose these systems, not realizing that it's not ideal. Okay? So there's that. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention, just because you're neurodivergent does not mean that you'll automatically mesh well with someone that's neurodivergent. Men that are on the spectrum are quite different from women that are on the spectrum. Women on the spectrum, they tend to do better with navigating social spaces. They can mask, you know, they have their preoccupations. They do value romance, but at the same time, they need things to be highly structured and consistent. And usually, people don't get to that place in the dating game until they learn how to navigate that or choose partners that can give them that. But in traditional dating, most people have to go with the flow, and people that are neurodivergent, they will never learn anything from going with the flow, right? Like, that's something that will never add up to anything sensible for them. Even men on the spectrum, even going with the flow, they don't do well with that, right? So it's being on a spectrum and having a tendency to have things be out of sight, out of mind. Let's think in another context, right? ADHD, out of sight, out of mind, right? Neurodivergence, it's almost like there's a way in which you operate, and the traditional neurotypical way of dating, it's not for you. And I would not be surprised, man or woman, that the reason why, if you're neurodivergent, the reason why you probably struggle with dating is because you don't acknowledge your actual needs or how you're supposed to be going about things. And technically what you're doing is not ideal, right? So let's take into consideration the nature of man, this biological wiring that they tend to often say, you know, they just want to spread their genes or have sex. Well, men on the spectrum, they're heavily preoccupied with things. So I can see someone, right, a man that's on the spectrum, feeling as though he's incompetent, inadequate, or, you know, questioning his manhood because maybe he wants to build things. He don't really care about chasing pussy, right? And mind you, that can be traumatizing, right? Imagine a guy, you just want to mind your business, and you know you're not normal like the rest of the guys, but now you're questioning if maybe you need to kind of like do something different, like chase women, but that's not who you are, right? That's a quintessential example of social pressures that lead, you know, people that are on the spectrum to engage in ways that are not ideal. Now with women, they may try going with the flow, and I'm not even gonna lie, every woman that I've ever known to go with the flow, yes, it can create madness, but women that are on the spectrum, they often get sucked into it, right? Because number one, it's needing a system, right? Being prone to codependency, preoccupation, being heavily preoccupied, obsessive tendencies, right? Because that's very neurodivergent nature. People on the spectrum, it's come with some OCD features, but let's say preoccupation. I don't want to give you guys any extra diagnosis, but let's consider it heavy preoccupation, right? So these women can like these men and be heavily preoccupied, and they can't go with the flow because technically, one, it's not logical, right? Due to the lack of direction. Logic would imply there's some type of math that amounts to something. Going with the flow, what is it adding to, right? The only way someone could possibly make sense of going with the flow with someone being on the spectrum is if, let's say, we're going to the flow for it to get to X, Y, Z. Right? Are we going to the flow, you know, with the flow for a relationship? Are we going with the flow until maybe you move away? Are we going with the flow until maybe we graduate? The direction needs to be clear. Okay. Now I'm going to hop over again back to men. With men on the spectrum, these men can actually do well with arrangements. I think people on the spectrum may even do better with arrangements because there's structure there, right? Everything is intentional. There's direction and there's structure, and these people tend to operate from a place of duty. That's another thing as well, right? So it's very all or nothing. It's either they like it or they don't. There's not much in between. Everyone needs to be prepared in dealing with someone that's on the spectrum. But what's most important is if you need to know yourself well enough to understand your needs, to how to communicate them. Okay,